everyone. Sam Shaw here, founder of Wall Street Mastermind, back today with another client interview for you guys. Today, I'm excited to have Eshaan on with me. Eshaan is currently a junior who just finished going through his summer internship recruiting process and had a very, very successful outcome. So I wanted to get him on here to talk to you guys about how he was able to accomplish what he accomplished and hopefully shed some insight and give you guys some advice as well that you could potentially use to help yourself in your recruiting process. So Eshaan, thank you for taking the time to be here and talk to us today.
Yeah, of course. Happy to be here.
Awesome. And so like before we dive into kind of your story and how everything went for you, if you don't mind just kind of introducing yourself a little bit so that our listeners can kind of get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm in third year now at U Chicago studying economics. I'm originally from New York as well. In high school, I did debate a lot and, loved sort of adopting a, contrarian viewpoint, doing detailed research into some random debate topic that I'd be debating at an upcoming tournament. And I knew when I came to college, I wanted to do something similar. It didn't have to be a debate, but something that involved the same sort of thought process. And a few upperclassmen friends of mine told me that, investing could be a potential path because you're often adopting contrarian viewpoint, finding opportunities that the market might have missed. And so from here, I kind of wanted to dive into this field of investing further, joined, a club on campus that focuses on investment research, where I also learned that, really enjoyed sort of learning about how companies operated and competed with one another. That led me to explore like other fields of investing, such as private equity, and had the chance to intern at two PE shops over the past few months. Loved both of my experiences, and really kind of confirmed my initial interest in investment banking. And yeah, since that's essentially what led me to go through the recruitment process and to pursue a career in investment banking going forward.
Got it. Cool. So I guess like you're a junior now, and you just finished your recruiting process. But if we go back to the beginning, like at what point during college did you decide or realize like, hey, investment banking is something I want to pursue? Was that
Mhm.
freshman year, sophomore year, or like, how early did you figure that out?
So investment banking, I mean, it was always in my head just because a lot of people on campus talk about it and talk about the different employers that are coming on campus. But to me, when I really decided that I'd be going down that path for recruiting, that was about winter break, my second year. So December, January of last year.
Okay, got it. So I guess like once you realize you want to do investment banking, like what was like the first thing that you did, or like how were you going about your preparation process initially?
hmm So I didn't really have a lot of friends on campus that were going into investment banking as well. So, it was kind of tough for me to really get a lot of advice and mentorship from those that have gone through the process. I mean, I was a part of finance related clubs on campus, but, a lot of the ones I was a part of, they're really big, bureaucratic, not really one-on-one mentoring and helpful and, catering to what my experiences were at that time. And so the way I started was just kind of looking at the multiple different guides that the clubs I was a part of sent to me. But a lot of the guides just seemed kind of generic. It could work for everyone. Um, I knew this from before just by looking at other career paths that a lot of companies really value behavioral interviews just because, they want to be working with people they actually like.
Mhm.
And I didn't really see it possible for a guide to help me craft my own story just through their generic guide that works for everyone. And so it was at that moment that I knew that if I really wanted to take recruiting seriously and wanted to actually have a shot at one of the top internships at the banks I was interested in, I couldn't just rely on the guides. I'd need to find either service or someone that can actually act as a mentor and provide one-on-one counseling.
Got it. That's interesting. So I feel like most people when they because everyone kind of starts where you started, which is they get their hands on the guides, 400 questions guide, Wall Street Oasis guide, whatever. Rather, there's like probably two or three guides that everyone always passes around.
Mhm.
But I feel like most people, their first reaction when they typically get their hands on these guys is like they're stressed out about learning all the technical stuff, right? They're like, "Oh, I
Mhm.
gotta memorize all the answers to technical questions." But it sounds like you actually had a different reaction where you were more worried about the behavioral interview. Is that
Hmm.
right? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, because like the technicals, I mean, of course they're tough, but they are something that it's there's one way to answer it. There's a right answer to it. And because of that, even if I was just relying on the guides, it might have taken me way longer than, had I not come to Wall Street Mastermind.
Yeah.
But I still know that at some point I would have mastered those technical fundamentals, even if it would have taken more time. The behaviorals, on the other hand, even if I spent more time, I could not be sure that my behavioral answers were actually going to be the ones that the banks are looking for.
Got it. Got it. That's that's really cool that you thought about it that way. I think because the way you're actually thinking about it is the right way. It's not how most people think about it, but um, I think like between the behavioral interview and the technical interview, I mean, all of our students that we work with know this because we tell them this, but what
Mhm.
most people don't realize is the behavioral interview is actually more important than the technical interview, right? Because I mean, both are important, don't get me wrong. Like you can't like mess up too much on the technical side and still expect to get a job, but um, like we definitely have students who have not done perfectly on their technical interviews and still gotten an offer, but we've never seen a student get an offer with, you know, boring answers to their behavioral questions or just like, very cookie cutter generic stories that don't really stand out. And so
Mhm.
at the end of the day, I think from the investment bank's perspective, um, they can't really change who you are as a person, but like all the technical stuff, they can teach you that if they need to, right?
Exactly.
And so that's kind of like what a lot of banks, most banks, I would say, place more weight on the behavioral side. And so I think you absolutely nailed it. So, so you kind of explain like why you decided to join a service like Wall Street Mastermind. I mean, I agree with you. Like, I think if you just use the exact answers in those guides, then like so are tens of thousands of other
Mhm.
people. Like that's what they're doing too. Then it's really hard to stand out, right? Um, I think the other issue too that a lot of people run into on the behavioral side is, and you probably thought about this too, is just like you can come up with your own answers, obviously, to these questions, but like, how do you know if that answer is a good answer?
Mhm. Exactly.
Yeah. Did you kind of find yourself struggling with that a little bit at all, or you know?
So when I at the time when I was deciding whether to go through recruiting myself or seek out a service like Wall Street Mastermind, it was very early in terms of where I was at. So in terms of behavioral and technical preparation, that's not my biggest concern. What I was worrying about, it was mostly that, there's so many different banks that have applications, um, different deadlines. Each bank sort of has a different method as to what they want you to do before getting an interview. Do
Yeah.
you network? Should you not network? One will have a higher view. And so I just kind of got flustered by and kind of overwhelmed by how many different types of banks and deadlines and internships I could apply to. And there was not really any website that like kind of put it all in one place. And I didn't want to miss out on any opportunities. So at that time, my biggest concern was like, I know that recruiting season's coming up. I want to fully maximize my options during recruiting season and capitalize on that. And that's what my biggest, I guess, concern was when I was thinking about whether to do recruiting by myself or through Wall Street Mastermind.
Got it. So basically, you made a decision from the almost from the get-go because you,
Mhm.
you you realized halfway through sophomore year that you wanted to pursue banking, and then you knew that given how early the recruiting timeline starts nowadays, basically you were already at that starting point of the recruiting process when you
Mhm.
realized, right? And
It
so
was it was I there was like a moment where I had a phone call with one of my friends, and he was going through diversity recruitment for one bank, and he said that it already had started and that he's already in conversations with them and he might have a super day soon. And this was all before I even begun thinking about whether investment banking was for me.
yeah.
And that kind of showed me that okay, it is in my mind investment banking. I haven't been serious about it, but now is pretty much my only chance to get into the field.
Yeah.
and I have to kind of make a decision right now.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So you decided just in the nick of time, but then it was basically like, hey, I have two options. I can do this, try to do this myself, or I can try to like get some help. And it sounds like to you at that time, given when you were starting your preparation process, the most important thing for you was just how can I do this in the most efficient manner possible
Hmm.
so that I don't miss out on all of the opportunities that are basically going to recruit super early. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is like actually a lot of the bulge bracket and elite boutique banks, they
Hmm.
recruit the earliest, right? And those are typically the banks that people want to get into. Uh,
Right.
Guys, so that makes a ton of sense. So then, like, let's talk about. So you hopped into Wall Street Mastermind. I think like shortly thereafter. I think you joined in like January of
Hmm.
something, right? Um, what did you do once you joined Wall Street Mastermind, and like, what were the things that I guess you found to be the most helpful, and
Hmm.
like, how was it relative to kind of your expectation coming in? Because I think like when people come into the program at first, not having gone through it yet, I'm sure you guys have certain like things that you imagine will happen, or just like certain set of expectations, right? And so like,
Hmm.
how did it actually play out for you? I guess.
Yeah. So honestly, it fit exactly the expectation I was looking for initially. Initially, I just wanted to make sure that my resume was the strongest that it could be. And the way to do that was obviously, as you know, I didn't really I just had secured an internship at a small PE firm just before I joined Wall Street Mastermind. So that was fine. But now that I had this experience, how can I make my resume stronger using this relevant experience, and what can I put in the bullet points? And
Mhm.
so I think the first few weeks was really just, perfecting the resume and adding a lot of, action bullet points on what I actually did during this internship, including information on the deals that I worked on. And just, not only from an aesthetic viewpoint, but just in terms of content as well, my resume looked way better. I felt way more confident when applying to jobs, and it kind of paid off. I mean, my summer internship, I secured it in March, about early March. It was through it was through a connection, one of my friends at U Chicago, but that person had asked.
To be clear, this is your sophomore summer internship.
Sophomore summer internship.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
But he had reached out for a call, and he asked for my resume. And the first thing he said on our call was, "I really liked your resume. It was really strong." The call literally lasted 5 minutes, and he gave me the internship offer. So that kind of really spoke, at least told me that, okay, the resume is something that, what Wall Street Mastermind did to my resume, it worked. It like made it way stronger. And yes, initially that was what I did when I joined the program.
And
Yeah.
this guy that hired you, said he was a friend, like he had his own firm.
Oh no. So one of my really close friends at U Chicago, probably the only one I know who went through recruiting as well. Um, his the where he interned last summer, it was just connecting me to that place.
Ah, okay. So
Hmm.
your friend referred you to his
Hmm.
old his old boss, who basically who he interned for, and that guy reached out to you.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. That makes sense. And then so that summer internship was what? Just another private equity firm, basically.
Oh no, it was actually really cool, and honestly made my interviews for third year summer way better, because not only was it a PE firm, but they also have three different SPACs. So every day I was literally on calls with investment bankers at different bulge brackets, different elite boutiques, going over, potential transactions with our SPAC. And so when I was actually doing my interviews for third year summer, and they asked me why banking, or tell me about this experience, the way I ended it was that, a lot of people talk about, oh, they know how they've heard about how the day-to-day life looks as a banker, and they find it appealing. I was able to say that I literally saw from a first-hand perspective how the day-to-day looked like, and I enjoyed it. So it definitely made my interviews way stronger.
Got it. That's amazing, man. I mean, this is why it's so important to one, get relevant experience, but also two, it's like the quality of those internships that you do still matter,
Hmm.
right? It sounds like you were fortunate enough to get like a really high quality sophomore summer internship, which is hard to do because a lot of freshmen and sophomores, quite frankly, like even if they are, a lot of them aren't able to find anything, but even the ones who are able to find something, like they're not, they're usually not like a,
Hmm.
super high quality one. Like they might be just doing a lot of busy work, right? But it sounds like you actually got like a really great experience, which then in turns, yes, makes your resume look better because you have, stronger bullet points. But I think even more importantly, it gives you a lot more stuff to talk about in the interview and it just makes your answers a lot stronger, right?
Hmm.
And I think that's the biggest kind of difference maker, right?
Definitely.
But I think what you said about how this guy gave you the job and just after a 5-minute call, that's pretty amazing too, which is
Hmm.
that usually doesn't happen. Usually you got to go through at least, I don't know, a 30-minute interview and sometimes even multiple rounds. But you were saying this was like the only interview and it was just 5 minutes.
Yeah. And yeah, so this, yeah, I kind of lucked out on this one, but even while I was going through the search for summer internships before this potential um opportunity worked out, like as you were saying, it was extremely difficult. It's so hard to get a second year internship or even a first year one without really having a connection, just
Yeah.
because you know, the students might not be technically proficient, they might not have much to add, and so it makes sense in the perspective of the firms as well. But even with that, my process for finding summer internships for my second year summer became way better once I joined Wall Street Mastermind. I mean, before joining Wall Street Mastermind, that is something I was actively doing. I was looking for different summer internships, was getting no progress, no interviews, nothing. After my resume was made up, once I came to Wall Street Mastermind, and then after the whole database with multiple different boutique firms across all cities in the US, I cold reached out to a lot of companies and was able to get first rounds, final rounds. Maybe they didn't work so well, but that was still more progress than what I was doing before.
Got it. So what you're talking about is, I mean, really, I think as an underclassman, I think like having a good resume, that's the first step, right? A lot of people don't have that. So we did
Hmm.
that first. Then the second thing is like kind of knowing where to look. I think what you're talking about is what most people do when they're trying this on their own is and you probably did this too, like go on LinkedIn, go on Indeed, go on Glassdoor, go on all
Hmm.
the job websites, and then just like search for finance internships and then just apply to as many of them as you can.
Yep.
That method doesn't really work very well, especially as an underclassman who maybe has less experience. Like they're getting thousands of applications usually, if not more. And so one, it's hard for your resume to be seen. And two, even if your resume does get seen, a lot of times you're competing against older students who have done more and have more stuff on their resume, right? So
Hmm.
really what we tell our students to do, especially the underclassmen, is like you have to go find the off-market opportunities basically, right? Not like the ones that are posted publicly and everyone knows about, but you have to kind of learn how to network the right way. And then also you mentioned the investment banking database, which is kind of our internal database that has whatever 1,000 plus banks in there, and then that gives you kind of like a list of banks to go after, which most other people probably aren't doing.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that's great, man. So it sounds like a lot of the early months in the program are focused on just building up your resume and making you into a stronger candidate on paper, which I agree that's typically always the first thing that needs to be done, right? Which is
Hmm.
why I always encourage people to start this process as early as possible. Like even freshman year is not too early to start because like it takes months usually just to like find the internships, do the internships, like add them to your resume, and like
Hmm.
by the time you've done that, like recruiting is around the corner, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And for you, recruiting had already started when you started doing this, and then you started building it up, which is fine, right? But then it just meant that you had to kind of parallel process all of this along with probably networking for your junior summer internship and then also prepping for the interviews and then
Hmm.
doing the interview. So you were just kind of juggling all these things at the same time.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. So then like what happened after that then? Like we talked about, building up your resume. Like
Mhm.
how was like the networking process for you and how was like the interview prep process for
Yeah.
you?
So the networking process actually, that's something I was also stressed about. Before coming to Wall Street Mastermind, everyone always says, oh, networking, networking, networking. It's probably the biggest buzzword I've come across in college so far. But I had no idea what that means. I knew that meant that, connecting with people at a company, but how, what to talk about, when does it happen? No idea. So come to Wall Street Mastermind, and when I go through the networking modules, literally the fact that it was explained clearly, and there was like suggested questions that you should ask, a whole script that was a plan that would really help your clients kind of navigate the networking process, made it very easy, because from that moment, every time I went on a call, I knew how to structure the conversation. I knew how to make it so that it flowed well. And at the end of it, it always ended up with that person either connecting me with someone at the firm, someone, that works in the group with him or her, or just getting a referral in the first place. And as those conversations picked up in terms of quantity, in terms of volume, that just became second nature to me. I mean, I wouldn't even have to have a computer on me. It was just very natural, just because that whole script kind of got ingrained in my mind, and it made the networking conversation sound natural, which I think is the objective of the networking call itself. You are supposed to ask questions and stuff, but it's also about how can you make it seem as natural as it is, because kind of tying it back to what I mentioned earlier, again, at the end of the day, all these people are just looking for people that they would also enjoy working with, that are also talented and hardworking and smart themselves. So that's something that I picked up after a few months. It took me a lot of calls to really get in the groove though. But yeah, so I started networking about in March. At this point, my resume was still all over the place. I had just finished, or my resume was strong, but my internship that I'd completed from January to March, it had just finished. So I was adding the stuff that I'd worked on towards the latter part of the internship to the resume.
Yeah.
And I didn't, since I started pretty late, I didn't really have a lot of the behaviorals and technicals on point, just because from January to March, I was really just focusing on the internship and my resume, and it would have been too much for me to handle all four of them. And so because of that, when the early banks recruited, like elite boutiques, did not have much kind of connection with them, just because I wasn't prepared. I started too late, and the people that were competing against me had all their technicals known, behaviorals known. They had started the process in the fall. And so even though I'd networked with them and had gotten referrals, besides the first round interview, didn't really make any progress. And so when the bulge bracket started to pick up about the later part of this spring, early part of the summer, that's when I knew it'd be my time to capitalize. I kind of had missed out on the elite boutiques, but at this point, I became very comfortable with networking. I finished about in May my whole behavioral sort of guide, the questions that are going to come and going to be asked in an interview, and written my responses. And so at this point, it just became a thing about memorization. The technical fundamentals that I'd learned through the modules really kind of broke down the technicals that everyone kind of thinks is a lot and pretty daunting, in a very concise manner. And about a week and a half after my school finished, I had that extra time before my internship began. I just decided for a week and a half, I would memorize all my behaviorals and all the technicals. And by the end of the week and a half before my internship, had all of that on lockdown. And so at this point, it just became a conversation about, connecting and capitalizing on all the opportunities presented to me. So yeah, I networked a lot with the people in bulge brackets. There was a lot of connections, just because, the networking was natural. I was being passed around a lot, was able to get higher views at some of the banks that are pretty selective with them, such as Bank of America and Goldman, just through networking. And yeah, in July, the whole interview process began. After my Goldman hire view, that was fully behavioral. I was invited to a Goldman Super Day for the classic coverage groups, and it was 3 20-minute back-to-back interviews. And yeah, my first interview, entirely behavioral. It was just a conversation She didn't ask anything technical. In fact, when she asked me, tell me about yourself, first thing, and I started listing, I started my typical tell me about yourself response. It'll touch on some internships I've done. She said, no, I don't want to walk you through a resume. I just literally just tell me about yourself that's not related to finance.
Mm.
And it kind of caught me off guard, but it kind of stressed the fact to me that literally what these banks are looking for are just people that they enjoy working with.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I had two more interviews for Goldman. The second and third were a little bit more technical just because I had two private equity experiences on my resume at this point. So touched upon those. But yeah.
Yeah. That's and obviously the I assume those interviews went well because then you got the offer after that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, and so the kind of, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, but it sounds
Yeah.
like
Sorry, that was a long answer. Yeah.
no, it's fine. I loved how detailed it was because it gives us a lot to kind of talk about. Um, but it sounds like, you know, on the networking side, um, you talked about like knowing like what questions to ask and knowing like, I mean, you called it a script. It's not really I don't want to mislead people. Like, it's not really a script. We don't say like, hey, use this script verbatim in every single conversation, because that's obviously not how networking works. Like,
Mm-hmm.
every single conversation is going to be different, but it's more of a framework, right? Like, you need to have some structure or some way to organize your thought, and also like you're going into these networking conversations with certain goals that you want to accomplish, or like certain things you want to take away from the conversation, right? And
Mm-hmm.
how do you accomplish those goals, and how do you be very methodical about, you know, progressing the conversation in a way such that, one, like you said, it feels natural and it doesn't feel forced, but two, that you still get what you came for in the end. Like, and you have about, you know, usually 20 to 30 minutes to make that happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that that's like one of the biggest things that, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's one of the biggest things that I think a lot of people are missing when they're networking. Is like, I feel like a lot of students, when they go in to the networking conversations, they don't really have a plan.
Mm-hmm.
They're just kind of winging it, like, oh, just go with the flow or whatever. But you have to be really strategic about it, and you have to really ask yourself, like, what am I hoping to get out of this? The answer cannot be, I'm just gonna talk to this guy, hopefully have a pleasant conversation, and then like fingers crossed after that he'll just remember me, and then like one day when I apply, he'll just like pluck my resume out of the pile. Like,
Mm-hmm.
no one is actually going to do that, right? Like, they're too busy, and like you're not important enough, right?
Yeah.
So I think like the networking thing obviously is huge. Like, without networking, honestly, I think it's really, really hard to get interviews, and you can probably attest to this. Like, all the interviews that
Definitely.
you probably got through your networking efforts.
Definitely. I mean, for Goldman, like just to get a higher view, you're like for U Chicago, Goldman had an on-campus recruiting team, and they literally had told us that if you don't network with us, we will not give you a higher view, and that's just a higher view. So
Yeah,
just goes to show how far networking can take you.
yeah. So I mean, there you go. If you don't network with us, we won't give you a higher view. So can't be any more clear than that, right? So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
I always tell everyone's like, every single bank that you're applying to, you got to network, and you got to aim to have at least like 1 to 2 bankers there that you just really hit it off with, and you know, hopefully you can get them to go to bat for you, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's the goal.
And definitely, and like they also reciprocated. I mean, one of the bankers I networked with at Goldman, he was a VP. Right before my super day, I had told him that I got a super day. He got on a call with me for 30 minutes and literally gave me like sentence by sentence description of how the three interviews will look like. So what they'll ask in the first 5 minutes, what they'll ask from minutes 5 to 10, and what type of questions to expect. And that literally all came from networking. So yeah.
Wow. Um, I'm pretty sure that he does not do that with every single student,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like,
Definitely.
there's no way he's doing that for every single student. And but that's what I mean though, is like, if you can network the right way, you can get someone to like you so much that they're literally like in your corner, they're rooting for you, to the point where they're willing to get on a phone and like coach you, or like tell you exactly what to expect in the interview. Like, that's just such a huge competitive advantage
Mm-hmm.
over everyone else who's going into these interviews blind, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's beautiful, man. That's amazing. And on the interview prep side of things, this you also mentioned like this is why we tell everyone to start early because since you started in January and then from January to March, you were just like focused on building out your resume, doing the internships that you need to do, and getting the relevant experiences to even have
Mm-hmm.
a resume to talk about. That unfortunately then kind of caused you to miss out on a lot of the elite boutiques because they go really, really early, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you still, after that, then have to start prepping your interview answers. And then you finally got your behavioral stuff done by May, um, which is like in time for a lot of these bulge bracket banks. And then like simultaneously, you also have to learn the technical stuff. So I think like the takeaway for people is like there are several boxes that you have to think about, right? That you need to
Mm-hmm.
check off. Your resume needs to be strong. You need to have like probably at least 2 to 3 relevant experiences on there these days to be competitive. You need time to do the networking, which we kind of already talked about. You need time to do all of your behavioral answers, and you need time to prep for the technicals. And so all these things, you also have to do all that on top of school and maintaining your GPA, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why it's like the earlier you start, the better. And then also like if you have someone helping you with this and you don't have to do a lot of like trial and error, you don't have to do a lot of like second guessing on like, oh, am I doing this the right way? Or like if something's not working, you don't have to wonder like, oh, why is this not working? Maybe I try this other thing and see if it works. Like that's what takes up a lot of time, right? Even for someone like you who had like a game plan that you could follow,
Mm-hmm.
it still took you months,
Months. Yeah.
right? It's not an overnight thing that just happens. Just like, oh, okay, I got everything I need. Like sometimes I feel like people have this wrong idea. It's like, oh, if I join Wall Street Mastermind, then I'm not gonna have to work hard, or like everything's just gonna get handed to me on like a silver platter. Like that's not what happened. Like
Mm-hmm. It's you get the information that like to you, but you have to really take advantage of those resources, and that is a lot of hard work, a lot of hours spent on the computer and preparing, and yeah.
it's like being an athlete, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Like just because you have a coach doesn't mean you're gonna win the game, right? You still got to show
Exactly.
you still got to show up to practice. You still got to like do all the drills. You still got to work really really hard. You got to hit the gym, lift weights, like,
Mm-hmm.
and then like even after all that, when you step out onto the floor like on this game day, you have to execute on the game plan, and you have to like do all the things that you've been practicing the way you've been practicing it, right? And some
Yeah.
people like they practice it one way, and then when it's game time, they actually choke, right? And so there's like a lot of moving parts, but like like having a coach is definitely better than not having a coach, but that alone is not going to be enough to get you the job. Like you got to show up and give it everything you got, right?
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and then I think the last thing that I thought was really interesting is just kind of coming full circle to what you said in the beginning, which is when you first started out and you decided to join Wall Street Mastermind, um, it was because you were worried about the behavioral interview, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, for your Goldman process, I mean, if we think about it, most higher views are purely behavioral for most,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you don't get past that, there is no super day, right? Then you get to the super day, still more heavily leaning towards behavioral, right? And I think also like just Goldman in general is known to be like more behavioral heavy than technical heavy, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
with that, like out of your 3 interviews,
So a lot of people, that's what I expected coming into the interview.
yeah,
Surprisingly for me, that it was like half half leaning towards technical.
okay,
My first interview was all behavioral. Just standard behavioral questions, why Goldman, banking, etc. My second one was surprisingly also, this all caught me by surprise, but it was very LBO focused. They didn't really go too much in depth, but they asked me to list like the 5 steps of an LBO and to talk about a lot of valuation questions. I think that's just because Goldman really also emphasizes like experiences that you've done in your resume. which can tie into a behavioral answer. So they would ask me, what did I do during this internship?
Right.
And they followed that up with some technicals to confirm that what I actually said, I'm knowledgeable about.
Yep. Yep. That actually makes a lot of sense. Because a lot of people exaggerate on their resume, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy to stuff your resume with just a bunch of keywords like, oh, I did an LBO or I did a DCF or I did all these things. But it's also very easy to expose someone when they're lying about that stuff. And so, um, I mean, that's honestly what you described is very common. Like,
Mm-hmm.
even back when I interview kids and whatever, like, we would definitely drill down on like anything they put on their resume, especially if it's like a highly relevant experience. If you tell
Mm-hmm.
me you worked at a bank, you worked at a private equity firm, and you did some deal, like I'm gonna probe a little bit deeper, not just like surface level stuff, but second and third to like the second and third level. I call it like peeling the onion and just asking multiple follow-up questions to see if you can really back up what you said you did.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like that's what they were doing. Whereas
Yeah.
like the behavior started out as a behavioral question, but then that's actually like the more sophisticated way to test you on your technicals rather than just asking you like, oh, so how does a DCF work? It's like
Right.
if you
Yeah.
said you did a DCF, like walk me through this specific DCF that you did, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then my third interview, I got asked this was the only question which I felt kind of unsure about during the interviews. That's partially due to me just because my knowledge of the markets, even though I had the resources, it was still, that's probably what I'd say if I had a weak point out of all the things I prepared on, that's the least I prepared for. And so they asked me, um, have PE ratios in the past year for like the S&P gone up or down, and to provide a reasoning why. I think I gave the wrong answer, but my reasoning was good, and so that I think that's what they were looking for.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Got it. So basically, they're looking more for, I mean, obviously, ideally you get the right answer, but more important than that is they want to hear your thought process
Mm-hmm.
and kind of like how you think about the problem and how you approach it and how you solve it. Right.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Got it. Okay, cool. So then you have those 3 interviews, you end up getting the offer. That's great. Obviously, I mean, Goldman's the dream, right? Like that's where everyone wants to go if they can. And so that's obviously a phenomenal outcome. Is there anything else you want to add about the program? And I think we talked about almost everything. We talked about resume, networking, behaviorals, technicals. Um, what did you think about like just the community aspect of it, like or like the network of Wall Street Mastermind? Like, was that beneficial at all, or?
Yeah, definitely beneficial. I mean, there were not only were there, threads with all the other students that are going through recruiting as well. So if you have a general question, you can ask, but also, other people ask questions that also can apply to your situation. And
Mhm.
there are people responding to that in a very timely manner. So I'm not only when I have a question, I can get assistance on it, but the questions that are subconsciously in the back of my head, but I just haven't asked, getting answers to those as well. But also, people go through the same interview processes, things like that. And so if I knew if someone had mentioned that they had an interview at this place, I could just reach out and everyone was super receptive to help out. I mean, it's ironic because you'd expect it to be the opposite since technically, we're all competing for the same spot.
Yeah.
But everyone, I guess it's the shared acknowledgence of the fact that this process is very tough that causes people to be a little bit more generous. And so a lot of students would also tell me what to prepare for. Even students that had gone through recruiting the years before, they even now with full-time jobs and complete internships are still taking their time to
Yeah.
give back to the current students going through recruiting. So that was all amazing.
Yeah. I think like what you pointed out is actually is a great point, which is when we first started at Wall Street Mastermind, I'll be honest, like I didn't know if people would kind of like help each other out because it is a
Mhm.
very it's like a very competitive process, right? But what I've been very glad to see is that we've kind of built this culture where everyone's actually very collaborative and very supportive of each other. And I think the biggest thing, I thought about why that is, and I think the biggest thing is, um, just there's no scarcity, right? There's no scarcity mindset inside of the program, because I think like most people who are in this program, they know they have all the resources they need already
Exactly.
to be successful. And so people expect to be successful, people expect to get offers, and therefore there's an abundance mindset where it's like, it's not like, hey, if you get a job, then I'm not going to get a job. Like there's enough
Right.
to go around for everybody, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like when people talk about, when competition happens, like in general recruiting, someone might not help someone else because that person might have knowledge to something that the other person might not. Um, but in Wall Street Mastermind, everyone has access to the modules, everyone has access to the database. At this point, everyone has the same resources. So you're really like, you don't really sort of have that knowledge difference. I would say, everyone kind of has the resources, and so might as well just be helpful at this point because you're not really creating a competitive advantage by not.
Yeah, there's no like information to withhold really, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I think like also you talked about how a lot of our alumni who are maybe already working full time, even they're still giving back. They're still helping our younger students out because they got the same help when they were going through it, and then so they're just reciprocating, right?
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's like we even have alumni who help our students get interviews, or help them prep for interviews or whatever, right? It's like it's good to have these people already working at these banks, and especially as our network continues to grow, like that's just going to become the case more and more in the future. I'm sure people are going to be reaching out to you about Goldman Sachs, right?
Right.
So anyway, I think that's an amazing thing. I guess like one last question for you, which is, was there one piece of advice that you got maybe during your recruiting process? I mean, it could be from whoever, but was there like one piece of advice where it was like just helped you a lot, made a big difference for you, like maybe something that you want to pass on to other people now that you're done,
Mm-hmm.
that you think will help everyone else as well?
Honestly, I'm not sure that there was some advice that I was given that, really propelled me throughout my process. But at the same time, there are a lot of takeaways I took from the recruitment process that I would change about the way I handled it had I known about it in hindsight. Um, First of all, start early. That is probably like if I had just started maybe in August or September rather than December, January, that would have given me a shot to, be competitive for elite boutiques. It would have doubled the number of banks that I was looking at and that I could have potentially gotten an offer from,
Yeah.
and would have definitely made my life less stressful just because I know that if one thing doesn't work with one bank, I have multiple different other banks that I can rely on. And at the same time, it really comes down to, as we were talking about earlier, the behavioral aspect. And the behavioral aspect, the way you really nail it is by confidence. And the only way you can be confident is by having mastery of all the different types of questions they're going to ask. And the only way to really have mastery is by, starting early and preparing so that you literally have an idea of all the types of different questions that they could ask and how you could potentially react based on the questions they ask. So yeah, if people, I would, to people thinking about the recruiting process, if there's even a slight bit of you that is hinting to you that, okay, I might be going down the investment banking timeline, not saying you have to commit or anything, but definitely I'd reach out just for an informational call, which Wall Street Mastermind does offer to any clients that are potentially interested in. And if it seems as something that has gotten your interest more, then I'd definitely recommend starting early.
Got it. Got it. That's great advice. And I guess, that's a good segue into, what I was going to say, which is we do offer, we call them free virtual coffee chats nowadays, where what happens is you actually get on a call with an alumni, or an alum from Wall Street Mastermind, which is basically an upperclassman who's already gone through the recruiting process successfully. They already secured an offer from one of the top banks. And it's just like, a free networking call with any other upperclassman that you would talk to. And you
Mm-hmm.
can just pick their brain on the recruiting process and ask whatever questions you have, get some advice. And from there, if you're still interested in learning more and you still want to talk to our team, then our alums can easily introduce you to us and help you set that up with our team. But even if you don't, then that's totally okay. Then you don't lose anything. You just basically got a free networking call,
Hmm.
um, and hopefully whatever advice you get, you can take that and go and implement it on your own, right?
Right.
So for those of you who are interested in this opportunity to have this free virtual coffee chat, you can go to www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. The street's abbreviated to ST, so it's wallstmastermind.com/apply. And you can just pick a time that works for you. One of our upperclassmen alums will talk to you for 30 45 minutes, and then we can take it from there. All right, so with that said, Ishan, I want to thank you for being so generous with your time and coming on here and talking to us about just your entire recruiting process and being so detailed about it and really giving us kind of like a behind the scene look of how everything worked and how everything happened, right? And obviously, amazing outcome for you at the end. I'm super happy for you, and looking forward to seeing what else you accomplish, both during your time at Goldman and beyond. Really, so.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's the least I can do for all the help throughout the recruiting process. So yeah, thanks so much for that. And yeah, just thank you in general.
No, absolutely. It was really fun working with you, and always very rewarding to see a successful outcome in the end. So, guys, that will be it for today. We're gonna wrap it up here, and hopefully you guys enjoyed this, and we'll be back with another client interview for you guys sometime in the near future. All right, so stay
All
tuned.
right.
Talk soon. Bye.
All right. Bye, Sam.